Ted Brewer.
Hey Daniel, bud, how you doing?
Hey, man, I'm doing all right here in crazy Indianapolis, Indiana. How's it going down in Florida?
Absolutely wonderful. We've been having great weather here the last few weeks. It's hard to believe they're not spraying us with any chemtrails, so that's always a blessing. So doing absolutely wonderful, Daniel. Good talk to you again.
All right. Well, man, you're right in the epicenter of a nation bending, mind bending event that happened at that school shooting down there. And Ted, things in Florida are direct. What's happening in Florida really is directing things across the nation. But how did you perceive that school shooting down there from your standpoint?
Well, the sheriff has got kind of a checkered past. He doesn't have a real good reputation in the area. Scott Israel's his name, but he's an interesting fellow. He belongs to a Shabbat cult, or sect of Judaism, and it was the same. I believe one of the same Shabbat sects that ended up finding this guy on videotape, the supposed shooter. And I say supposed shooter because Gottlieb, the former head of the MK Ultra program, who was called the Black Magician, said that with a proper cocktail, you can make anyone confess to anything, regardless of whether they were guilty or not. So, we've got a lot of really weird things going on down here. We had the Pulse shooting over in the Orlando Gay Club here last year, a year and a half ago now, I guess it's been. And Austin and I, we went over there, and pretty much everything they told us, the police that we had, there were 3 police officers there. The first police officer told us that everything we've been told in the press was a lie. None of it was true, and the truth would eventually come out. Another set of cops were there also. They were guarding the back entrance, and they wouldn't say anything to us. They said no comment, no comment, no comment. The FBI had already been put in, and everybody had a gag order on them. So we've got a very corrupt judiciary here in Florida, throughout the country with the FBI. We've seen that repeatedly. I mean, it was all started with good old J. Edgar Hoover with his cross-dressing and all the weird stuff he was involved with, and that organization has been corrupt at the highest levels since then. And I'm not saying that all members of the FBI are corrupt. I certainly don't mean that. There are good, meaning, good, caring, good, God-fearing men who belong in the FBI. But these guys who are running all of these politics here in Florida and doing all of this doesn't make any sense. Including, remember, this sheriff, they've been called, multiple times, dozens of times about this kid. Nobody ever did any investigation on this kid. I mean, it's absolutely the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And now this guy is in a situation where, he's become a national hero. I've seen multiple pictures of him now with Bernie Sanders, with Hillary Clinton. He's just super, super liberal. And the sad part about it is, guys, is that, you don't really know what the truth is and what happened and how many children were killed and how many people are going to continue to be killed for these types of tragedies. Now, Governor Scott here in Florida is basically wanting to, start up gun confiscation orders, and he opposes arming teachers for school safety, which Donald Trump says that we should be arming teachers. I agree with that. The teachers in Israel and schools in Israel, in many cases, have armed guards with machine guns at the doors, and many of the teachers are armed, and they have no more school violence. They had that happen to them back in the 70s once. Had some Arabs come in and shoot up their schools, kill a bunch of their kids. They put a stop to it. And see, this is the problem. Taking the guns away from a few nuts is not going to take care of the problem with mass shootings. It never has and it never will. Same thing. You can't take all the cars away from everybody because you got alcoholics drinking alcohol. It doesn't make any sense because, taking the cars away from us, those of us who don't drink, doesn't make any sense. Same thing. If you stab somebody with a knife, you can't take all the knives away. So this whole thing is complete and total nonsense. So I don't know. I hope the United States people are smart enough to realize that this is another false flag. It's another set-up shooting. I don't know how many children actually were shot here. I don't know what the actual count is. I know that the one kid from the FBI's, who the son of the FBI agent, he was clearly being taught and rehearsing his lines on what to say. And I know at the one other meeting that they had, that the other guy who was told by CNN that he could only ask certain questions, and when he refused to ask the questions they tried to get him to ask, he basically was told he was not going to be allowed to be part of this. And the NRA spokesman, she also has said, she was basically almost attacked at that meeting on CNN the other day with Rubio, and she said, quote, crying white mothers are ratings gold for the media. And this is in a fired-up address of the Conservative Political Action Conference on Thursday. The NRA spokesperson, Dana Loesch, slammed the FBI for missing a series of warning signs ahead of the Florida shooting. White also asserting that mainstream media benefited from such tragedies. Many in the legacy media love mass shootings, she told the crowd. Now, I'm not saying that you love the tragedy, but I'm saying that you love the ratings. Crying white mothers are a ratings gold for you. And guys, this is what we've seen over and over and over again. A nut kid who's on psychotropic drugs, who basically is the lone wolf, who's been telegraphing what he's going to do for many, many years. Suddenly he does something. So suddenly there's some kind of active drill taking place, or the teachers have had drills here recently, or whatever is going on.
Right.
And suddenly we got 4 sheriff officers from this area, from this same guy, Israel, who are basically given even some type of stand down orders, or they're too scared to go inside. What an absolute mess, and what a bunch of lies. Just like we saw at the Pulse Club, just like we saw in Vegas, this story's already fallen apart by the seams. What do you think?
Well, I heard you and Austin talking about a book that was written that described that it would be in the future period. It would be a time when the school shootings would actually cause the citizens to rise up and demand that the Second Amendment best just be rewritten or erased, and that would be the causation for people to give up their arms. And it seems that's exactly what's happening.
Well, that book was written back in the early '90s. It was by oh gosh, Austin had that quote. The guy Bill Cooper.
Yeah.
And of course he was mowed down by by bullets, and he basically said that's what was going to happen. See what happened. Remember, every time a shooting takes place, Daniel, the media has to make a big brouhaha over it. The problem is that people are less responsive to it. So the shootings have to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Now out in Vegas, the guy who did the autopsies refusing to release the autopsies even under court order. The guy who did the autopsy saying he only autopsied half the bodies that were supposedly shot, the people that were dead. Now, I don't even understand how that even happened. I mean, and they said that Paddock had blue eyes, and the guy he autopsied had brown eyes. I mean, all of this up. See, a lot of this has to do with organized crime. And what people don't realize, and I tried to stay away from a lot of the organized crime as far as naming names and stuff, because I don't want to get, I want to be around for a while. But you remember what happened back in 1942. It was February the 8th, and there was a French ship that was at Pier 88 in New York Harbor. And this ship was basically sabotaged, according to a lot of historians, and it was sunk. And it was basically a French ship. And after the war started with the United States, and after World War I, in the bombing of Pearl Harbor, this ship was going to be confiscated and used to transport troops into Europe. And apparently some German saboteurs came in, and they started a fire on the ship, and the ship ended up getting sunk and at its pier, at Pier 88 in New York Harbor. Well, what happened is the CIA at that time, the OSS, the precursor to the CIA, didn't know what to do to control New York City harbors, and they knew the mob controlled a lot of what was going on in New York City harbors, so they contacted Lucky Luciano. At that point, they brought Lucky Luciano into their fold, who basically was serving a jail sentence, which was basically he was let out of, and he ended up getting this docking situation controlled by the mafia, the mob, in New York City, and so they had no more problems with any saboteur on the docks. Well, this set up an unholy alliance with the CIA and these guys as far as running drugs, running narcotics, everything else started right there at that spot. And the sad part about it is, Daniel, people don't understand history and how World War II was basically being controlled by the big business guys in basically England and in the United States, including the Rockefellers, including Ford, including the Harrimans, including the Rothschild banking cartels, and they funded Hitler's war machine in the rise of the Third Reich. And then in 1938, Hitler had enough of all of them and decided to throw out the central bank with the Rothschild banking cartel and decided to just go ahead and start issuing his own debt-free currency, and turned his back on these guys and decided to do it his own way. And when he did that, these guys basically decided he had to be taken out, and they allowed the entire world to go to war to do that, in which they funded, again, both sides of that. Remember, most of the trucks that Hitler were using were made by Ford. People don't remember that. In fact, there's a really good video you guys can watch. It's called From 9/11, from JFK to 9/11. It's a rich man's trick.
Yeah.
From JFK to 9/11, it's a rich man's trick. And it lists all of the industrialists, including Prescott Bush, who was a Nazi. This is the father of H. Bush and the grandfather of George Jr. Prescott Bush was a Nazi. And in 1934, he tried to stage a fascist coup of the United States, enlisting then the great General Smedley Butler, who was a World War I general, who was the most decorated soldier of World War I. And he ended up going to Congress and testifying against these guys because they tried to take over the government and put a fascist dictatorship into the United States and overthrow the government of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, all of these things happen. You go back and look in history book and you see all of this stuff, but these guys weren't charged. And then what's also interesting, they were so opposed to Hitler. The reason they financed Hitler after World War I, they were trying to stop the spread of communism into Europe because they had seen what happened to the royal family, to the Tsar's family, with Tsar Nicholas' family. and they wanted to build Hitler up as basically a bulwark against the Soviet Union. The problem is they kind of lost control of him, and he kind of decided to do his own thing. And then they had to declare war on him and take him out. But in the meantime, they made huge fortunes in World War I and World War II. And of course, then they got tied up with the mafia. And then if you read the book, Operation Gladio, the unholy alliance between the mafia, the CIA, and the Vatican, it goes into detail on how these guys interacted in all of the different wars in Laos and Cambodia and Southeast Asia and Afghanistan, all these different wars, which they fund and give the troops on both sides the armaments. And they allow them to make themselves vast fortunes by fighting these wars and running the drugs in from the Cambodian Triangle like they did back in the 60s and the 70s. And now from Afghanistan, which has increased its poppy production from 500 square miles in 2016 to 1,000 square miles of poppy production in 2017 to 480 metric tons, 4,800 metric tons in 2016 to 10,000 metric tons in 2017, all underneath the guise of Donald Trump, who was out of the military to pretty much make all their own decisions over in Afghanistan.
Yep.
The entire country is being run by this organized crime cartel mob / Rothschild banking / Vatican / mess that we've got ourselves into / CIA organized crime. So we've got a giant mess that we've got going on, Daniel, and that people don't want to talk about it. All of this stuff is directly linked to these false flags. Because remember, we brought in General Gehlen from Germany after World War II to start running false flags in Europe after World War II because there were Nazi sleeper cells all over the place. They decided to hire him, and they started doing sleeper cells saying the communists were attacking everybody and doing these false flags all over Italy, France, Germany, blaming it on the communists. It was, in fact, our government, our CIA that was doing this. And I personally believe when you start seeing these false flags like we have here in the United States, it's just another version of Operation Gladio being done on the soil of the United States of America because they do not want us as a nation to be heavily armed like we are, and they're doing everything they possibly can to take our guns away to bring us back into a one world, new world order, as President Bush said, the 1,000 points of light, this new world order that he has, which was founded through Skull and Bones, founded through the Yale Black Societies. I mean, this is a major mess that's going on all over the planet. And all of these false flags that are being done, Daniel, are being done to orchestrate the continued demise of the United States to allow the Sabbatean Kabbalists or the Sabbatean Frankists, who are basically the money people in all of this, to resurrect their serpent god and to basically bring us into this new world order where their god basically being Lucifer, for us to worship him. And that's what this whole thing's about. We can do is go into more and more detail on World War I, the Treaty of Versailles. We can talk about the Dulles brothers who wrote the Treaty of Versailles and who basically, gave all these war reparations, which were close to $60 trillion in a day's money against Germany that they knew would cause World War II. We could talk about how the Dulles brothers wrote the Treaty of Versailles and how the one Dulles brother was also involved in the Bay of Pigs invasion with John F. Kennedy back in '62, and this is the same Dulles brother, and then John F. Kennedy fired him, and then all of a sudden he's still working through the CIA to assassinate Kennedy, and then he's made a head of the Warren Commission to investigate the death of Kennedy, the guy who fired him. This whole thing is so twisted, it's so convoluted with all this mafia stuff, all of these dons, all of this drugs, all of this Afghanistan heroin. It's all tied together in a nice, neat little bow that these guys orchestrate and run from their 1,000 lily pad bases around the world, the military bases that we have, that we could run human beings, we could run children, we could run organs, we could run cash, we can run gold, and we can run drugs unabated all over the United States, all over the world, because these shipments that are coming in on C-130 transport planes, they're not inspected. They don't go through customs. And then, of course, with that money, the drugs come to the United States, they are transferred back into the mob families and distributed into the United States. And, of course, a lot of the banks are then used, and a lot of the casinos are then used to clean up this money to basically feed this machine, along with the Exchange Stability Fund that was started in 1934, which basically took over the Treasury of the United States through the Fed in New York, which allows them to facilitate the shadow government, financing of the shadow government. And that's how they were able to steal $20 trillion off-book balance sheets, and that's just what we know of. It could be a lot worse than that, Daniel.
Yeah. Hey, I did watch that movie, and I love how it goes back in history and brings that forward and connects a lot of the dots. And one of the things I noticed in that movie you refer to there is that the CIA and the FBI, the alphabet, the agencies were involved, and you look at what's going on today. I mean, it seems like it maybe either continued or restarted. I mean, it could have never just died down. But today, these guys in the FBI and the CIA and State Department, they're being kind of like outed a little bit, and you can see that there's some sort of conspiracy behind their operations. They have been weaponized, and I think they were weaponized particularly in the Gay Kenyans administration. And but I want to ask a question: when in that movie it was saying that they didn't count on the fact that JFK was an honest guy, and they couldn't corrupt him like they wanted to. Would you say Donald Trump is in? Could you interpose his face right in that circle of agencies around JFK that was trying to corrupt him? Could you put him in there, or is he part of the cabal himself and he slipped in?
Here's the thing with Donald Trump. Donald Trump has surrounded himself with Zionists. He has surrounded himself with people who are members of the Shabbat, like his son-in-law. Donald Trump has given us people like, Gottlieb for the FDA, which is a huge, basically drug pusher and vaccine pusher. Donald Trump, however, has also, really pushed Second Amendment's rights. He's pushed now to arm the school teachers. He's also, got us out of several horrible, horrible treaties. I think that Donald Trump has found himself in a very deep ditch that he knows if he's not careful, he'll end up just like John F. Kennedy. And I think he's pretty smart because I think he's trying to expose a lot of these guys and let them expose themselves. And I don't think he's all bad, though I don't think he's a saint. And I believe that he's trying his best to stay alive and do as much as he possibly can for the good of the United States, in addition to doing some things he shouldn't be doing because he's being forced to do it. Because remember, the shadow government's been controlling the White House for a long, long, long time. Ever since Kennedy was assassinated, I mean, we've not had a true constitutional republic since that point. I mean, Lyndon Baines Johnson was a career criminal. Richard Nixon was a career criminal. He was basically found through a newspaper ad that Bush put in the paper looking for somebody who wanted to be a president who could be compromised. You've got another person, with Jimmy Carter, or Ford was okay, but Ford was just an interim president. But then you have Jimmy Carter, who ended up basically being just a complete doofus as far as in the White House, couldn't get anything done. Of course, we had Ronald Reagan, who probably would have been a good president had he not been shot. I think Ronald Reagan would have really done a pretty good job if he could have gotten in there and gotten the things done that he wanted to do. But then he turns right around and he basically signs the weapons ban as far as for the machine guns, which again takes a lot of the armament that people should have to protect themselves against. Let's say we have an invasion against the Red Chinese or the Russians or the Koreans, which I don't think is going to happen. If that happened, we have to protect ourselves. I mean, Switzerland, everybody in every household has to take every year. They have to go take training with their weapons. They keep machine guns in all of their houses. Same thing in Israel. I mean, so taking the weapons away from people only allows the bad people to have weapons. But when Reagan was shot, he basically had a lot of stuff done behind his back, like Iran-Contra. I don't think Reagan had any idea what he got himself to do that. With that, that's of course they're running the drugs for the alcohol, for the drugs, for the guns, and all the stuff they were doing. And again, that was all CIA. Of course, George Bush is the senior. Now I know George Bush. I've had dinner with him. I've talked to him probably 50 times. I didn't know a lot of these things that I'm talking about right now when I spoke to him. And had I brought any of this stuff up to him, I can guarantee you I would never have been asked to stay on that seminar circuit. I'd have been drummed out immediately and never asked to speak again. But, it's interesting to me that, you go back in history, you start seeing all of these things these guys are involved in, and it's awful. Of course, then we get his stooge, Bill Clinton. That next stooge comes up, we got George W. basically gives us the Patriot Act, the National Defense Authorization Act, and the greatest false flag ever that hit the United States, the explosion and the bombing of the trade towers and the implosion of Building 7. Either they were done through thermite or done through a mini nuke or done through some type of space-based, platform weapon systems. We have no idea, or a combination of all of them. And then, of course, we have all these never-ending false flag shootings that started back in the 80s and 90s in the United States. And again, like Bill Cooper said, you get enough kids shot in enough schools, people are going to want to have gun control, and they're going to want to take guns away. Like now Governor Scott is going to try to pass that same thing they did in California, where if you think somebody's nuts, they've got a gun, the police will come take the guns away, and they've got to go to court to get their guns back and prove they're not nuts. I mean, this
Right.
thing's crazy, Daniel. And the sad part about it is that I hope that we have enough people in our government in Florida that they're not going to allow this kind of nonsense to happen and actually give a bill like that to Scott or whatever he wants to do to try to get it done, that they veto it. Because quite frankly, this is a major, major mess. And remember, it's like Austin said on our show, we've had all of these illegal aliens, immigrants come into the United States who have basically are all going to be voting Democratic. That's one of the things with Obama. He wanted everybody to come in and vote Democrat. We all know that now from the border agents who talked to these guys, and they told us that back. So he's got this huge thing now that's happened in Puerto Rico where you have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Puerto Ricans will end up in Florida because of the disaster that happened on that island. And what ends up happening is it shifts the base of voting base here in Central Florida. They have ruined Central Florida, Daniel. The roads here and the schools were so overcrowded already. Now the infrastructure is completely and totally disastrous. I-4 off of gridlocks almost the entire distance from Tampa to Orlando, which is 100 miles. I mean, it's absolutely disastrous what they've done to the Central Florida area as far as the bringing in of these aliens, these immigrants that have no place to live, no place to go, and all they want to do is drive cars out on the highways. And it's just here with Disney World already making this giant disastrous traffic jam to begin with. It's just getting worse and worse and worse. So, they're turning Florida, which is one of the most populous countries now, into a Democrat haven like they've done now with Colorado, like they've done now with California, like they already have done for many years ago with New York, what they're trying to do with Texas. And this is the whole game like they already have with Oregon and with Washington State. And they're trying to turn this into a democratically controlled state to sway the election with the Electoral College. So that's what this is all about. It's all about gun control and taking away your rights, my rights, and everybody's rights as far as being a free American citizen, having freedom of speech, having freedom of the press, and having freedom to go unmolested on your way. They're trying to change all of that, Daniel. What do you think about it? What do you think we need to do about it?
Well, here's what I think we need to do about it. We just need to have shows like this, shows like yours and others, and Hodges and all of them, Zelensky, and get out to keep putting the truth out, because eventually people will turn. I know they're trying to get Alex Jones. They're trying to cancel him on like a 3 strikes and you're out thing on YouTube, man. But we just got to keep finding ways to get the truth out. And I think people will understand and hear the truth. I think people intrinsically know when they're hearing the truth and when they're being lied to. Basically, I mean, if a Democrat talks, you're being lied to. But I think there might be. I look optimistically that there is hope that people will continue to seek alternative news sources and get the actual factual truth. But let me ask you something on Governor Scott. He came out saying that he wanted Christopher Wray to step down from director of FBI. He said an apology won't cut it. But since then, he's kind of mellowed on that. Where do you think he stands on that?
I have no idea. I mean, he's right now, let me read the article I pull up on. It says he's pushing firearm confiscation orders and stands opposed to suggests that teachers should be armed. CNN reports that Scott is pushing a violent threat restraining order, which are similar to California's gun violence restraining orders. And they are designed to secure court orders to confiscate firearms following a family member's complaint. It is difficult to see how such orders designed to be triggered by family request would have been effective against Nicholas Cruz. After all, the family with which he was staying repeatedly called the police on him in November 2017, but refused to file charges when the sheriff deputies arrived. A member of the family which Cruz was staying explained that Cruz's erratic behavior by saying he'd been suffering significantly from the loss of his mother earlier in the month. Scott is also pushing a bump stock ban, tougher background checks, more stringent rules against the mentally ill, and a ban on purchasing or possessing firearms by anyone subject to an injunction for protection against stalking, cyber stalking, dating violence, repeat violence, sexual violence, or domestic violence. Now, why, some of the stuff sounds okay, and you think, well, those people shouldn't have guns anyhow. Here's the problem when they put that kind of stuff and that type of legislation into place. Then they start saying, well, if you've ever had a complaint against you because you said something bad on the internet,
right,
you don't get to get in that. You don't get to have a gun anymore. If you ever have somebody who was an old girl from 20 years ago who decides that she doesn't like you because you married somebody else and she gets to say something from 20 years ago now, or your neighbor basically is bad because you got a new pickup truck, and they're all angry because of that. And they say, well, he's got guns. He's got a gun sticker on his truck. He's a nut. Let me call up on him and tell him he threatened me. We saw him running around the yard, carrying a gun. Now we need to take his gun because he's obviously insane. when you start that thing, Daniel, when you start going down that slippery slope, you got to be really, really careful, because they can continue to pass legislation which will basically strip everybody. They already have taken hundreds of thousands of weapons away from former veterans. I think it's 230,000 now who have been declared basically post-traumatic stress syndromes, and they're saying that they're not allowed to carry or to own guns at all, or it's a felony for those guys because they're not safe to be carrying weapons. I mean, so this has already been done to the veterans. And I'm not saying that some of these veterans haven't been messed up from these wars, because some of them are pretty messed up. I talked to one a few months ago at a convention up in Charlotte. And I never forget the guy. I was talking to him, and he had a booth there. I forgot what he was marketing. I think it was some kind of telephone thing for cell phones or basically satellite phones or whatever. And I started asking him questions about the war, and he told me he had PTSD, and he was like 80% disabled, and he got kind of schizoid on me, bud. I mean, he started acting really weird. I thought to myself, wow, a lot of guys are coming back because they've seen what the country has done to them on repeated tours of action over there, and they've basically been put through the ringer, and they're not themselves anymore, and so they may not be safe carrying guns. Now, however, there are many veterans that have come back that have not suffered from PTSD, and they need to be our bulwark, so to speak, against any kind of tyrannical government. And of course, the government's scared of that. And that's why so many of these guys were given literally dozens of immunizations when they went into the war theater. And a lot of these immunizations will greatly shorten their lifespan or cause them to have senile dementia at a very young age, like General Schwarzkopf. People don't realize that he actually ended up with Alzheimer's disease, probably from all the immunizations he had. And I knew Schwarzkopf very, very well. He was a friend of mine. I probably did 50 seminars with him back in the 90s, and he was a real soldier, a real man, and a really, really nice guy. And he was actually a man of his word, just like Colin Powell. Colin Powell's a nice guy too, though he is a member of the CFR, which I did not know that back then. And remember, Donald Trump has more CFR members, which was basically founded through the League of Nations, through this whole mess back in 1919, 1920. He has more members of the CFR and his administration than the Gay Canyon did. So, yeah, it's one of those things, Daniel, that we've got to really pay attention to what Trump's doing. And when he does something right, we need to really support him. We need to continue to pray for him. But we need to realize that when he does something wrong, we have to do and say something about what he's doing. Otherwise, he's not going to get any feedback. He's not going to know any better. And of course, the media won't know any better. Of course, when he does what they want him to do, like dropping missiles into Syria, all of a sudden he's their Wunderkind. He's their Übermensch, like Nietzsche would call it, his Superman. And as soon as he starts doing things like not going along with the New World Order and the Rothschild banking takeover of the planet with the reserve banks, then all of a sudden he's one of those guys who's the bad guy. So Donald Trump's in a very precarious position right now. So we got to continue to pray for him and continue to support him. But when he makes a mistake, we got to call it out and say, hey, look, this isn't okay. We don't want these guys in. Like we already called up about Gutley. We didn't want him to be admitted as far as the head of the FDA. Right. Of course, that didn't do any good. So remember, the same guys that are controlling the military-industrial complex are the international banking cartels that are also feeding the money through the mafia and making the money work through. You got the Jewish mafia, you got the Italian mafia, you got all these different mafiosos all over the country, the Russian mafia, and all these guys work in concert together to distribute the drugs and run the cash and do all the things they do for their nefarious activities all together, and a lot of that's coordinated through the CIA. So guys, don't believe everything you see or hear on the radio or the TV, because quite frankly, a lot of it's what we call obfuscation, and a lot of it's due to the atavistic hatred that these groups of people have for Christians, because they've hated Christians for thousands of years, and they'll do anything they have to destroy Christianity, which is what their primary goal is to destroy the unity of the believer and the people here in the United States that claim to be Christians. That's why there's an all-out war against white people in the United States and globally. They're doing everything they possibly can to destroy fertility, destroy reproduction, and destroy any kind of influence that we would have from a Christian standpoint on this country as they try to implement their New World Order. But the good news about it is they seem to have hit a few stumbling blocks now because of the internet, which is the new Gutenberg press, which is allowing us to understand that these things are going to continue to be exposed the best we can. Speaking of Alex Jones losing his YouTube channel, they already took my YouTube channel, Daniel. I mean, they took 95% of my videos down. They basically just crippled it, and it's all off copyright nonsense, which wasn't even true. And so I just shut the whole thing down, and we keep our show on Global Star so people can listen to that, and that's not controlled by YouTube. And I'm not going to play their games like with the Hagmas now. They're running their video feed now through Global Star, and Global Star is carrying the video feed, and so it's not running through YouTube anymore. And so there are ways around this that we're going to be able to do. We just have to be frosty and pay attention to what they're doing and try to step out in front of them before they try to take all of us down as far as being off the air and not having a voice any longer.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, Ted, I appreciate you coming on the program tonight, and hopefully we have you on the program again sometime.
I'd love to, Daniel. Thank you so much. And continue to go to work. And I want all the listeners to know Daniel's on point. He's got it covered up. You guys need to listen and pay attention to him, and you need to go ahead and share these videos and these shows with all of your friends. Thank you for having me on, Daniel.
All right, you bet. Good evening.
Bye-bye.